AI and content, they go together like salt and pepper, or maybe more like oysters on pizza. Ew, maybe you like it, but I don't. And it depends on who you ask. For Ty Magnin, CEO of Animals, he's a big believer that AI can give content marketers superpowers. And he's doubled the organic traffic for a client using AI-driven content. So in this Marketing Powerups episode, you learn, first of all, how to create AI content that matches your brand voice and tone. Second, the tools that Ty loves using for AI-driven content. Third, Ty's process for creating content using AI. And number 4, a career power-up that's helped Ty accelerate his growth. Before I get started, I've created a free Powerups cheat sheet that you can download for free and apply Ty's AI-driven content strategy. You can find that at marketingpowerups.com or in the show notes and description below. Are you ready? Let's go.
Marketing Powerups. Ready? Go! Here's your host, Rambly John.
Thank you for being on the show. I'm excited to talk about Marketing Powerups. You've been in content. You've led, marketing at Appcues. You've led marketing at UIPath before, leading it all the way to IPO. I'm super exciting to talk about content because there's this thing that I saw online that you're like doing this side hustle around AI and SEO content. It actually started off. It seems like it started with a story. You were talking about a blog post a day, which is super ambitious. I can't imagine like posting a blog post a day. Can you? What is the story behind this blog post a day campaign? And I'm curious how AI started in your world.
Totally. Well, I think like all of us, generative AI is just like a super interesting, game-changing technology that I think everyone has this interest in dabbling with or putting to real use. I wanted to put it to real use. I think I was sort of early to believe. I think we all had like an experience with like GPT-3 maybe and similar tools that we all like used it once and like kind of felt like, oh, it's not that good, right? But then there was like a quiet evolution maybe in November, maybe it was in like August last year where they had some new release and it started to actually be pretty damn good. And so I was at a company leading marketing at the time called Emotive. It's like a SMS marketing technology. And, we really didn't have a lot of organic traffic coming through and, having the Appcues DNA, right? Like that's one channel that I feel is a strength of mine and that could really be good for this business. It made sense for them. And so I wanted to just like, put the throttle down on pumping out organic. And, the usual way that we've been doing this is you go pay an agency like an Animals, a premium to handwrite this stuff, or some freelancers, you're writing it in-house. And it's pretty costly, right? But with Gen AI, I was like, well, fucking try it out. Just like crank this down.
So cool.
And, we had an SEO person at the time. You had a keyword list of like 300 great ideas,
Wow.
Yeah. That like made sense for us, And so I was like, I don't want to spend 3 years getting through this thing. Like, let's go. So we spent, I don't know, $300 a blog post. We partnered with Animals actually very early on. Like, I think they hadn't really done this thing yet, but we were kind of the test dummies. I talked Ryan Law into doing it, who was there as a CMO at the time.
Right.
And we did it. We did a blog post a day. We saw our organic traffic just like literally 30 days in, just double, like big step to growth. And I think like Google just liked seeing the cadence of content we were putting out, right? Like we went from doing, I don't know, one every other week to like one every day. And we were rewarded for that.
Yeah.
So I kept going up to the right until I stepped off that company after 5 months or something.
But that's a cool experiment that, people usually think like, hey, it takes, I don't know, 6 months is what I've heard traditionally for you to see results from SEO.
Yeah, that's because you're doing like one blog post every week. You condense that timeline, Ramley. You just do it.
Yeah, super interesting. I've never seen that so dramatic of a rise. The other thing that's super interesting,
just to note, we did have good backlinks already at the domain homepage and a decent domain authority. So we were working with something like a solid You know what I mean?
Yeah.
From their
Like
early days.
Animal's price is not cheap. And I think they increased their price at some point to like come up with a blog post a day. That's like, I'm not sure, 6 figures at least, maybe more.
Right. But we dropped, part of the deal was we dropped the price way down, right? Because they're using generative AI.
Right, exactly.
Well, now they have actually a generative AI practice, if we can call it that. And it's like way more, economical, we'll say. And they're, a lot of clients are kind of eating that up as an alternative to the premium work, and so we're all just figuring it out. But like for me, there's kind of 2 tiers in content. Like there's the generative AI, like SEO focused stuff that you can and should do at high volume right now. I don't know if it'll last forever. Eventually Google might, chip away at how much traffic they're sending to your site, but whatever, like it's working right now. And I think because that's becoming a bit more commoditized potentially, that like the higher level thought leadership stuff is becoming that much more important, right? And so what I'm kind of toying with is like, how does tier 2 support tier 1? And like, what does tier 1 look like if it's not organic focused, blog posts?
It's interesting you're talking about can you talk a little bit about that tier? Like, you see, that sounds super interesting. Tier 1 is like the best kind of content. Is that what you're saying? And then tier 3 is not that. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I kind of see it that way. So tier 1, I mean, I'm sure you have a ton of ideas around this. Like you're doing this now, like this is tier 1 in a sense, or a lot of the shows or the series that you've produced for Appcues are tier 1 for me. Like User Onboarding Academy, like that shit's valuable, right? Like you can almost sell the thing. It's so valuable.
Yeah.
I just helped the company Vendor produce a Q1 SaaS trends report. It took all of Vendor's so Vendor basically is a, I don't know what to call it anymore, but like it's kind of aspiring to be a marketplace for people to buy and sell SaaS. So they have a lot of transaction information about, who bought what SaaS and how much. And so that is like a treasure trove of data that we turned into a quarterly report that was like custom design, custom dev, probably like 10,000 words. Like we invested a ton in it. And for me, that's another example of tier 1 content. There's probably a zillion examples of that, but it's that stuff that is like could be generative AI supported, but is not like at its core generated from some corpus of, language model.
And in what would you consider tier 2 and tier 3? Like SEO content would be tier 3, like more like, I guess, targeted keywords. Is that what you would say? I'm not entirely sure. I'm curious how you see the lower tiers.
I do think it's that. It's like, the keywords that are probably not your most important keywords, because the most important ones might still need to be handwritten in a way, right? Like you need that thing to rank first, and you're going to invest a lot in doing that. So I see tier 2. I only have 2 tiers in this very simple model. Okay.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's like all the other keywords that you're kind of like, hey, we're just filling in these gaps. We're going to bring up our domain authority. We're going to teach Google that like these are the topics that we want to rank for, and so on.
Yeah. Interesting. I feel like
how do you see it though? Like, give me your 2 cents on this idea. I'm sure I'm wrong,
It totally makes sense. I think it's what I'm hearing with the tier, like tier 1 are ones that you invest a ton of resources. Designing it, you could, a lot of like your thinking process where like, that report for Vendor that might have like compiling data is hard work, right? Like making it understandable, readable, digestible, and like valuable. It's like you need a human to do that, to like really like dig into the data. And then tier 2 would be more, you're right, I think some of the stuff that has worked in the past where we got a bunch of keywords. Let's write a blog post about it that has this specific H2 headings and this many images, and so that it ranks for that, but like it might not necessarily be novel or new in that sense. It could be like a traditional, maybe listicle side to it. Is what I'm hearing here.
Right. And my answer is like, why would we do tier 2? My short answer is because it still works.
Still works. Yeah, you showed it with this example, and I think I saw in LinkedIn that you've also worked with a few other companies as a side hustle that
Right.
has doubled their organic traffic just based
Right.
on this. That's what I'm hearing.
Right. Yeah. So I've seen each client so far, knock on wood. I started basically doing a side hustle around the turn of the year because I saw the success with the motive. I was like, all right, shit, I can make some extra money, just offering this to friends who, would also benefit. And so each company has seen their organic growth rate really make a big increase, usually like 2xing their organic growth rate. So moving from 5% month over month, which is really good, to like 10% because they've
Wow.
increased their
Right.
cadence and output through generative AI services.
Do you have a hunch? You mentioned it a little bit earlier, like, it's working right now, but Google can like totally remove this almost arbitrage. Like, well, I'm curious, like, for sure, while it's still working, we should tap into that opportunity. Do you see that continuing going forward this year? I know, or like, will that end anytime soon?
It's a great question. I don't think randomly, and I'm really curious to get your input on this. And there are some people that are far more expert in this, sort of in the thinking about this than I am. But a few things feel clear to me. One of the biggest companies in the world, right? Alphabet or Google, their biggest revenue driver is all about like sending traffic places, right? So like for them, they don't want to totally disrupt themselves, I imagine, and like stop sending people traffic, because then who's advertising there? Like, what is the advertising model on Google? So there's probably an artful way that they might continue to reduce the number of clicks, because like we have seen a reduction in clicks over the years, right? 0-click search is the big thing. And we might continue to see that trend, but I don't think it's going to zero anytime soon, right? The other argument is like, okay, maybe Bing, it's so funny, it's would have been laughable years ago, like maybe Bing starts to take more of a portion of Google's traffic because people like using the OpenAI search engine, whatever they're calling that now. But I don't think we're like really at risk of search-oriented content going to zero anytime soon.
Before I continue, I want to thank the sponsor for this episode, 42 Agency. Now, when you're in scale-up growth mode and you have to hit your KPIs, the pressure is on to deliver demos and signups, and it's a lot to handle. There's demand gen, email sequences, RevOps, and more. And that's where 42 Agency, founded by my good friend Camille Rexton, can help you. They're a strategic partner that's helped B2B SaaS companies like Profit to Wall, Teamwork, Sprout Social, and HubDoc to build a predictable revenue engine. If you're looking for performance experts and creatives to solve your marketing growth problems today and help you build the foundation for the future, look no further. Visit 42agency.com to talk to a strategist right now to learn how you can build a high-efficiency revenue engine. I think it's Eli Schwartz and Kevin Indig who talk about it in their show Contrarian Marketing, where I don't Google, it's their cash cow. the search ads, right? Like they don't want to disrupt that. They've been forced to disrupt that through Bing and OpenAI like doing this. And I think you're right. I think the next 12 months. I mean, knock on wood here, because like we can look back to this episode and like Ty and Ramley's wrong.
I expect wrong. Yeah.
Right. Like
direction.
People don't Google search anymore. They just use their brain. They just plugged it into this algorithm, and they can just think. Now, I'm not entirely sure what the future looks like, but I think you're right. It's something that Google will have to figure out, but they're not gonna fully kill their cash cow again to figure that stuff out. I mean, that's an interesting discussion around like what state of content can look like in 2023. I think the other thing that I'd love to chat with you about specifically is, you've seen content evolve in a fast-growing company or startup, and even an enterprise company. At Appcues, I would say we're still like figuring that out. It's funny because we were joking, like we're in this messy middle where we're like trying to figure out exactly where we're gonna go. They're gonna go next. So, but you've seen it all. You had UiPath, like went all the way to IPO. You were at Appcues. You're at Motive. You're a vendor. I'm curious, like how you see content evolve as it goes to a different level of maturity.
Let's start all the way down at the beginning, right? Like it's actually interesting to think of 0 to 1 content.
Right. Yeah.
And my favorite, I still tell companies to follow the Appcues playbook, which was, I don't know if you know this, tell me, but Jonathan and Jackson are the 2 founders of Appcues. And early on, they built a user onboarding academy, okay, which was like a 12 lesson course, maybe 16 at the time, on different, it's chronological in a way. It was sort of organized on, the different lessons and angles into user onboarding. And they even had, different experts like Samuel Hewlett and other design types write articles for them. And they hosted that all on their website. So it was this probably the deepest thing on user onboarding at the time, and that asset continues to pay dividends for Appcues today. I'm sure it's evolved a lot, right? Like now, like you'll have to tell the audience. I basically went from written to like, we did a video form of it, and like, what is the user onboarding academy now?
Right. I think when I came across it, it was 2019. I was working at Product Led West. It was like a 5-day email series, I think. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And then it turned into the Product Adoption Academy, which the evolution is that now.
Well, what is that? Like, what's inside the Product Adoption Academy? If I go sign up for it today, what do I get?
Right. Yeah, it's that course, User Onboarding 101. It's like a 6 lesson, self-paced, mostly text, but some videos from experts. Very similar to what you mentioned. I got videos from Andrew Kaplan, Samuel Ulick. So it is very, I would say, like, it sounds very similar to what you just mentioned all the way from the very beginning, which is interesting.
Cool.
It's still paying dividends.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, I think when you look at, if a founder asks you, like, how do I get started doing content? Like, I think it's like, don't just write random blog articles. Like, go write the deepest thing on the problem that you're trying to solve, and like unpack your brain there and get your friends that you've been talking to also contribute. I think that's important. I think a written form is one way to do it. I think nowadays, like, I don't know, videos and podcasts and LinkedIn, like, it might not show up the same way as V1. But that's what I think is a good way to get it off the ground. From then at Appcues, like, what we went to do is this is where I came in, and I said, well, I think I'll start a blog. Like, if I'm going to double down on content, what's that going to be? Am I going to write the next user onboarding academy? No, I said, we're in this experimental phase. We're going to dabble in product adoption, feature adoption, all these different areas. And so we started writing in a more sort of broad sense. And then we kept seeing organic traffic increase, and we just doubled down on it again and again, right? So we hired animals. Right? We were able to go from 1 blog post a week to 2 blog posts a week. Then we hired writer, and then we went from 2 to 3, right?
Wow.
And so on and so forth until, we hire a video person now. That's another way to do more content. And so that's kind of how it went through that stage. Up until where you are, which, I mean, I guess you're calling it the messy middle. So before I talk about UIPath, because that is kind of the other end of the spectrum, that's the enterprise playbook. Why don't you catch me up on, like, what does the content program at Appcues look like today?
It's funny, you mentioned, all the stuff you mentioned is like what we're focusing out on even more. So like correct me if I'm wrong, this is tier 1 content, right? You're really like investing in like really in-depth guides and content. The past year, the tier 2 stuff hasn't performed as well, those like SEO pieces. And that's why we're like, you mentioned focusing more on video, focusing more on academy, educational pieces as well. So I think it sounds like it came full circle. Or like it started with tier 1, it went to tier 1 plus tier 2. And then like now it's more like 80-90% is probably focused on that tier 1 versus the tier 2 side.
Where's distribution coming from for Appcues these days?
Right. I think distribution wise, SEO is still our biggest play, though it's like not as effective. Everybody across SaaS has seen like a decrease in SEO. This I mean, it's mainly like we have that email list that we have like I think 30,000. And then started doing more outbound stuff in the sales side. So I think email, social, and then outbound has been, and also search. Search is still a big piece lately. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I think content in 2023 is like kind of back to the beginning. We're just trying to
Yeah.
figure out. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you're not alone in that. I'm feeling the same thing. Do you want me to talk about UiPath?
I'm curious how that has been a different experience for you in terms of like your approach to content there, your team.
Yeah, like at Appcues, you can kind of extrapolate from what I already said, which is like I was able to kind of help edit and direct a lot of the content and the subject matter that we should be writing on because I understood the domain pretty well and understood our product. And like, one person could kind of oversee it all. But at UiPath, so for context, I joined UiPath again, Series B. We had 3 products. We were like 40 million in revenue. By the time I got off, we were $1 billion in revenue and beyond.
Wow.
We had like 30 products. Like not joking, 30 different SKUs.
Shoot. So you went from 3 products to 30 in that space that you were there. Yeah.
And so no one person could be expert over this stuff, right? So like I couldn't even edit other people's stuff because I didn't know like the applications. And then we had a solutions team, like big, there's a big industry play and then there's like the horizontal plays. And so like you quickly realize that like your content team is an expert in nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the playbook becomes like, how do I get this team to empower all these SMEs across the organization, subject matter SMEs, SMEs, word I didn't know until I joined UiPath, by the way, and facilitate, right, content production through them. And I have to get them to like use the right terminology, right? Maybe sound a bit on brand if you have a kind of centralized brand voice. Sometimes companies say, I want you, Ramley, to sound like you. But for us, we cared about sounding like UiPath a little bit more, like a bit. And so it was about like implementing the tools and the processes and building the relationships for content creation across an organization with like, just like depth to it.
That sounds exhausting. I'm not sure. Like there's just so much 30 products. Was there like one content marketer focused on 5 products? Like how did that work in that sense? Now I'm like looking at UiPath and LinkedIn. There's like I'm not sure if this is correct, but over 4,000 employees as of today. So what was that?
Yeah.
How did you manage that? So it's huge.
Yeah, it's we're definitely like chasing a rock down a hill. Like I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if you ever hear Jackson, the CEO at Appcues, used to always say like a lot of startups, like every day it's Sisyphean. You're pushing a rock up a hill. Do you still say this?
Yes. Oh yeah, he just said it 2 First Thurs ago. First Thurs is like our company wide. He just like it's like
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so most startups, the whole trajectory is pushing a rock up a hill every single day. But at some point, the hope is that like you tip over that hill and now you're basically chasing the rock down a hill and you're kind of like, just don't kill anyone. Just don't kill anyone.
Don't destroy something.
Like
you're right.
The whole time it was like, we're chasing the rock down the hill. I think it was just a semblance of like great product market fit. It was just like, we're in a white hot space at the right time. So, really it was about like keeping people from doing something that's off brand or like creating content that's just like not aligned to our core messaging, things like that. One key tool for us that we implemented that really helped us hone in all these content contributors was writer.com or Writer. It helped us align everybody to our voice and tone and used AI to do that. So it would like basically proofread someone's doc and say, this is long-winded or this sound casual, which is how we wanted to come across, etc. It also had a terminology bank, which you can imagine is super important for a company with 30 SKUs, right? Like we had such a proliferation of like how to, product names, key feature names, etc. And so it would work like Grammarly in a way, or like even like Microsoft Word spell check to say, here's how to use the right term. And so that was hugely useful. It did more than just that, but like that was the core of what we bought it for. And, we had content contributors from just like, we had hundreds of them, because you had like your team in the Netherlands, right? That wanted to put out a white paper on like some industry important to them. Like they were working with a freelancer or an agency that was, we're going to host this on the website. So like we had to make sure that sounded like UiPath the same way that something written by our CMO does. And so a writer was important, and then building again the processes and the relationships helped us manage that at scale.
Did you find like people the inbound requests for like that? For example, that white paper, was that an inbound request from that team in the Netherlands, or the content team was like actively pursuing SMEs in the organization?
So there's the thought around like, are you a centralized service business or are you like decentralized? And you're kind of the enabler of other teams to create great content. We, in the beginning, were centralized. When we were a marketing team of 40, when I joined or so, we were creating like all the content, like sure, product marketing wrote product pages and we helped them with that. But like we were writing, so it would be a request and we produce it if it's of value. That became smaller over time, believe it or not. And instead, we became the enabler of others to produce great content. And then we also helped, we measured how content performed. And if we saw something work well, we call it out and try to facilitate more of that. And then vice versa, right? If people were producing some stuff that wasn't getting downloaded, call that out. We start kind of cutting back on that. So it was almost like we were evangelizing content and good content in the organization. And that was kind of the central role. Which again, back to our original point, super different, right? Than what you're doing in Appcues. It's like what you're doing in the messy middle or in the early days. It's a very different kind of role.
That's super interesting. Did you find like going back? I really love this 2-tier system that you talked about earlier, and I'm trying to apply it here. Did you find like you were doing more of that tier 1 content, like the white paper? I would consider it tier 1, less so tier 2 kind of stuff, or I'm curious because I've only so my past roles have been mainly in like those messy middle companies. I worked at GoDaddy once where our company got acquired, so I stayed there for 3 months. I didn't stay long. So like this is like super new to me what you're talking about. So I'm really curious how everything is, including this mix.
Yeah, so great question. We actually did have 3 tiers of content.
Oh, okay. That's cool. All right, exciting.
My own mold. Yeah. So the first tier was stuff we deemed as of strategic importance.
Right.
And we had a calculator that actually looked at 3 factors for every idea or project that came our way. The 3 factors were value to customer, right? So what is this thing? How valuable is this thing on a 1 to 5 scale to our customer? The next was value to the business, value to UiPath. How much revenue, basically, do you think we can expect from this thing? And the third thing was feasibility. Like, do we have the time, the resources, the expertise to produce this thing? If a project or an idea ranked really high, that might become a tier 1 strategic asset. And we produce those in-house by hand ourselves.
Interesting.
Tier 2, the next level down, would be we would fund it, okay? But it was produced by our trusted agent. So again, the content team says, this is of strategic importance still. We will pay, but we can't do it ourselves. We don't have the resources. So we will fund it and we will still edit it and manage the project. And then tier 3 was basically not that important. It is a bit more. So we would say the operating model would be you fund it or you do it yourself. And you do it within these guidelines, meaning like, they have to like follow the brand process, or like if they're building like a web page, it has to follow a certain format, et cetera, et cetera.
What was the split mix across this? Yeah, I'm curious now. Like, is it like 40, 30. I'm not entirely sure. This could be just off the top of your head, like what that looks like for you.
It's a great question. Like, what was the split between each tier? A lot ended up in tier 2. A few things, a quarter would be in tier 1. And then a lot of stuff over time became tier 3 because we got better and better at enabling teams over the years. Kind of out of necessity, but also strategically, we just knew that we couldn't do it all. The first few years at UiPath, Ramley, was like, we were just drowning. We were chasing the rock down the hill. We were just drowning in requests and ideas and needs because like we were growing from 3 SKUs to 30 and we were growing 1,000 people to 4,000. We were growing from 40 million revenue to, 500 over these couple first years. And so, it was just a lot of hours and a lot of stress and a lot of things that fell through the cracks. But through that to me was our messy middle. And on the other side was this pretty clear system that was right-sized for the business that we were in.
We're at this, I'm curious what you take us on this, because this is a challenge we're facing at Appcues right now, where, there's this drive to create more content, and sometimes there's too many content programs at that point where like there's the academy, there's a podcast, there's the good UX, and there's this, and then it gets to the point where like, there's a lot. Like, did you get to that point at UiPath where like, shoot, we have so many content programs, like how do they all fit together? How do they tie together? And that tier system is very helpful. But like, I'm curious, did you ever face that problem there at UiPath where like there's this too many program kind of problems, content programs? And I'm curious if what was your approach?
Yeah, we did sometimes. Like I think about our customer reference program, which I sort of inherited and then carried along with me for a year or two. And then, kind of limped along towards the end of my time there. But what happened was, so like the production of case studies and customer videos, okay? Like that was kind of core to this customer reference program. And it was a little bit like, it felt like it was a tier 2, tier 3 thing. Like it's important to the business, but like it wasn't the thing that like we had enough of it. It was like going well. It didn't need to be going that much better. So it was kind of like limping along, And what happened over the years was like, we kind of played hot potato with the responsibility, So like, right. So like it was like content's thing. And then we kind of tossed it out to the regions, like, hey, regional marketers, like you deal with this. And then they kind of would toss it back after a year. Right.
Yeah.
And so, that's not a way to solve the issue.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what happens. I also think back to Appcues days. Listen, you have to kill your darlings, right? Like you have to cut stuff that's just not pulling all the weight. Like it's usually an 80-20, right? It's like 20% of the stuff's pulling 80% of the weight. And if you've been giving something an earnest go and it hasn't really gotten to that 80%, you kind of have to take a hard look at it and figure out, all right, how does this, continue, or how do we wind it down, I guess is the better question.
That's very helpful. I think especially Jackson has been talking a lot more lately about focus, like let's focus on things. And I think this is like super, super important for people to realize like, there's just so many content options. You can do podcasts. Now there's TikTok, there's Threads, so many things that content teams can do, and like focusing on the right thing and going back to the right thing, especially for startups, maybe that tier 1, like in-depth content is where people should start first.
Well, I think what this takes is good measurement, right, Ramley? Like you have to know what's driving pipeline or MQLs or revenue at the end of the day. And if you have a decent enough attribution model, then you can just kind of, unemotionally say, and it's hard, of course, with like a podcast. It's like, I don't know,
right.
They hear about the cats and it's fine. It's like, I get it. But then you can also do like self-attributed surveys and whatnot. Like there's a way to do this stuff that can help guide you on where you want to double down and where you want to cut. And I think that content marketers do themselves sometimes a disservice by not setting that stuff up like early enough and being disciplined about tracking their expenses and their investments against, any returns. Too many times we like leave it to demand gen to figure that out. But really, I think it's everyone's job in marketing, regardless of where you sit.
It's not just about like, often I feel like content teams are just like, hey, let's just get traffic. Let's just get the eyeballs, and demand gen will figure out how to convert them. Or the growth team, the performance or growth marketing team will figure out how to convert them once we have them. But to your point, like it's the whole marketing's job to create that pipeline, or else, people wouldn't have that job.
Demand gen's good at measuring their own stuff. Okay. And you might think, oh, demand gen, you'll help me figure out how my content efforts are returning. But like, often they don't. And then when it comes time, when it's, 2023 in the spring and the CEO is making layoffs and cuts, right? Like if you left it up to demand gen to figure out your attribution and they didn't, like you're fucked.
Right. So
you're
true.
probably getting laid off. Yeah. Right. Like, so like take it into your own hands, content marketers. Maybe we'd be getting laid off a little less. You know what I mean? Because if we're able to say, this is how much pipe content's driving, we need to be doubling down, Mr. Executive or Mrs. Executive, not cutting. You know what I mean? I think then we become less of a squishy thing that is, a nice to have, and more of a core business and go-to-market driver.
Yeah. I feel like that's such an important point. Especially, I feel like more marketing teams these days are like trying to do more with less, or trying to increase their pipeline with less people or less budget. So I think being, I guess, disciplined about like figuring out which channels are working, which is not, is super important there. I want to shift gears and talk about career Powerups. Specifically for you, you've been in marketing for over a decade. We're head of marketing at Appcues way before my time, but I still, once again, I still see your name on Google Drive, which is super cool to chat with you here. You were director of marketing at UIPath, and then you worked at vendor. I'm curious, like, what's a Powerup that's helped you accelerate your career? It could be something soft skill, it could be something that's more marketing related, but what is that Powerup that's helped you in your career?
Yeah, love it. For me, the Powerup, and actually I'd take a page from Jackson Knoll, who's the CEO at Appcues, his book, which is basically to focus on the principles of psychology, if you will. And if you master those and you understand cognitive biases and like that's what your tool belt is made of, then regardless of how markets evolve, technologies evolve, if you're in a big company or a small company, like you'll have a core to pull from, and it can be applied to so many things. So yeah, the Powerup is understand human psychology and use that in your marketing.
That's so good. That applies to so many things in marketing, like content, brand, demand gen. I think if that foundation really is core to it. It's funny because like I got a chance to chat with Margaret Kelsey, who also worked at Appcues, and she said like marketing is just she's so great. She said marketing is just changing behavior at scale. And if you don't know the core principles of that, then like how do you even do your job? How do we even do our job as marketers, essentially?
It's such a hack because psychology doesn't change often like the internet does, right? So like if you understand those principles, then you can have a long career just based off of that.
And one final question, if you can give yourself, a younger version of you, a piece of, it could be one or two pieces of advice, it could be more, it could be around marketing, it could be around career, it could be around life. What would be an advice you'd give a younger version of Ty who, just maybe starting out, or it's just like getting out of college and trying to figure out what to do in life or in marketing?
I think it'd be to stay balanced in life, pursue all that's interesting, not just career stuff. I think looking back in my 20s, I really focused in on work. And although I think that gave me a bit of maybe a head start, or like I got to skip a rung in the ladder, I also think that it came at a cost of like just being a more interesting person, right? And having more balance in life. And I think now, like, I don't know, I think I'm paying the cost of that a little bit. So yeah, all the folks that were a little more balanced in their approach through their 20s that I sort of turned my nose up to, I now am like, oh, maybe they understood something. So yeah, my advice would be slow down.
Slow down. That's good. And when you say balance, is that work and life balance, or like just did you like overwork yourself at that? Is that what you're talking about there? Like, you know, working 60 hours a week?
So. Yeah, I think so. There's something like, I think it was the working hard, and then also it's not just that. The Ramley was also just letting go of myself a little bit, and like, experiencing a lot of things. Like, I sort of just like would say yes to anything that I thought was going to like drive my career forwards, which could be more hours, which could be a different job, but I'm not sure it was totally in tune with like, my inner child, I guess, and what I want long term. So anyways, I'm still wrestling with this one, but I think there's something there.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. The inner child piece is so important. I keep going back to Margaret because it's just very fresh. She talks about like, having fun in a creative output somewhere, which sounds, I don't know, that sounds like a very Margaret thing to say. She's like this artist that creates and paints, and I feel like that there is definitely something there where like sometimes the creative output to your work kind of pulls away from creative output somewhere else, and finding that even that balance there where like you're doing stuff to create, not necessarily to I guess make a ton of money out of that creating thing that you're doing, could be very healthy for a lot of folks.
I love that. Yeah, like most of us got into marketing because it's fun to create stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, don't lose that through the process, for sure. And also don't put all your eggs in one basket and expect to get all your creative joy out of work. Like it's important to also pursue that on the side. I used to write a lot of poetry.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Studied it in college, the whole thing. And like, since I started working, I gave it up. Like it wasn't intentional. I just like stopped. And it's not that I just gave up the time I spent writing it, but like I gave up in some sense the like poetry, like writing poetry is a way to explore the world. It's like a lens to view the world through, that open-minded and present. And I feel like some of that has been, I'm like that way at work, but then when I leave it, it's kind of off. Like I guess my advice is like, don't trade one for the other. Don't put all your eggs into the work basket. But you can see I'm still kind of writing this thing out. And I think I learn every day.
If you enjoyed this episode, you'd love the Marketing Powerups newsletter. I share the actionable takeaways and break down the frameworks of world-class marketers. Go to marketingpowerups.com to subscribe, and you'll instantly unlock the 3 best frameworks that top marketers use to hit their KPIs consistently and wow their colleagues. I want to say thank you to you for listening, and please like and follow Marketing Powerups on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. If you're feeling extra generous, kindly leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and leave a comment on YouTube. It goes a long way in others finding out about Marketing Powerups. Thanks to Mary Sullivan for creating the artwork and design, and thank you to Faisal Kaigo for editing the intro video. And of course, thank you for listening. That's all for now. Have a powered up day.
Marketing Power-Ups. Until the next episode,